Now, the last video, we spoke about the call flow in a general view or a high level. As to the SIP message is going to which node and the next node and the next node till the flow is finished between the two users. And I call it high-level call flow on a node level. Now, in this slide, I'll still speak on a high level, not in details, but I want to see an event view. So bottom line, what are the main points or events that happen in the call flow? You need to know that there are different topics that happen like media handshake and resource reservation, then precondition phase, then ringing phase, then answer and media flow phase. And I'll give a high level view on this part, but you will organize in your head what is point number 1, point number 2, point number 3, and point number 4. In other words, you will see that the call flow, and understand it. So you will know that, let's say, for example, XYZ happens between two users. So we'll explain on a high level, not in details. And what was also explained what's inside the message. This will be explained upfront in the next videos. Now, before any call that happens between two users, a few things have to happen. What are they? Things like codec negotiation, resource allocation. The two calls have to know the type of media they want. So let's say that George wants to speak to Patrick. So before the call connects between George and Patrick, they both have to agree if this call is audio or video, or what type of media will the call be, either audio or video. Now, what else? George and Patrick have to reserve the resource that they will speak on. So they will reserve the dedicated beer that their voice will go on, which is the user plane traffic. And if you followed me from the CS, which is the circuit switching, user plane is your voice itself. And for this voice to reach between George and Patrick, they both have to reserve from their end a dedicated beer, something to connect their voices. And also codec negotiation has to happen to see which codec they will speak on. Will they speak on a wideband codec HD or not? What if George supports on calling HD, but Patrick doesn't support the call on HD? So can the call be HD? No. They both have to reach something similar. So before any voice call, we activate a few things, and this is called signaling procedures. Now let's explain how the call flow goes, all right? So for example, let's say that this is one, this is user two, okay? Here. Okay. Now, what's the first thing that happens in a call? The first thing that happens is something like a SIP media handshake. And what does this mean? First, let's draw it. So first thing that happens is between two users is the SIP. Now, this media handshake is from both sides, okay? So media. So again, this media handshake is from both sides. And what happens in this SIP message? Or what info is sent in the SIP media handshake? The SDP offer and answer of another user, for example. All right. Okay. So again, the media handshake happens between user one and user two from both ends. All right. And the info that is sent in the SIP media handshake is the SDP offer and answer of another user, for example. Right. Now, what is SIP media handshake? When user one decided to call user two, he will send a SIP invite message and ask it to make a call. And in this SIP message is some important information, like the IP address of user one, like the IP address of user two. I have to know where the IP address of user two is. And this is available in the SIP invite message. And I'm talking in general. What is the invite message? Like the IP address, the bandwidth, the SDP part, which has the bandwidth, the SDP, and the codec as well. And the codec, which is supported by user one. And as I said, user one may support that he can talk on wideband, and user two might not support talking on wideband. So user one has to send his list of codecs, and user two also has to send the list of codecs he can speak on. And this happens in the first point, which is the SIP media handshake. So they start trading some information, such as the list of codecs that user one supports, the IP address, the bandwidth, as all of these are things shared between the two users in the first SIP message. And during the negotiation of the SIP media handshake happens, what's mentioned below, let's type it as well. Okay. So during now, let's see what happens in the negotiation phase. All right. Well, withdraw first. So this is two. Of course, I'm talking about the GX and RX interface. And in between, we will write resource alignment, right? And in between, there is resource sorry, just organize a bit. Okay. Okay. Now, again, in between is the resource alignment. Now, what does this mean? So it states when user 1 is sending to user 2 in his SIP message, and user 2 also responds during the media handshake. What happens? Resource alignment happens. So user 1 goes and sees the dedicated beer, which he will put his voice on, or which has his speech. And the same thing happens with user 2, of course. Okay. Now, same thing happens with user 2. As it goes to see the voice beer or media beer that the user will talk on, or the voice speech that will be that will be on. And this happens by a node called the PCRF node, right? So the node is the PCRF, and this also has the same node, which is PC. Okay. So does this mean user 1 will go on his PCRF and reserve a dedicated beer, and user 2 will go on his PCRF and reserve a dedicated beer as well? Well, half is right and half is wrong, which means that user 1 is not the one who actually reserves the dedicated beer. No, it is the SPG or proxy CSCF. And take care, proxy CSCF has another name, which is SPG. So the proxy CSCF is the one that goes to PCRF and tells it that this person is in negotiation phase and is initiating a call. So please, PCRF, we want to reserve a dedicated beer to go on. So proxy CSCF in one sends to PCRF1 to reserve a beer to use for user 1. With the GX interface, which is the P gateway, and also the same thing for user 2. It has to reserve for itself a dedicated beer, so proxy CSCF2 sends to PCRF2 and tells it to please reserve a dedicated beer for its user, which is user 2. So PCRF sends to the PDN gateway 2 to reserve a dedicated beer. So this is the resource alignment phase. So I explained in the beginning, happens the handshake, and some information is traded, like the IP address, the bandwidth, the list of codecs of the users, and during this phase, resource allocation happens as the two reserve for themselves a dedicated beer to initiate the call on, one from the A number and the other from the B number side. Now let's go to the third phase, in which a question here will be asked. The question is, precondition is applied So this is the question asked. Precondition is applied or not. What if we said yes? This means that the B number, the SCSCF of user 2, all right, will not or won't send to user 2 and let it do ringing unless it receives confirmation from user 1 that it initiated its dedicated beer. So again, the serving call session control function of user 2 will not send, the serving call session control function of user 2 won't send to user 2 and let it do ringing unless it receives confirmation from user 1 that it initiated its dedicated beer. Again, precondition is asked if it is applied on this call or not. If it is applied, this means that user 2 will not send the 180 ringing. And 180 ringing means that the message says the phone is ringing. So it won't send the 180 ringing till it's sure that user 1 reserved for itself a dedicated beer. And how will it make sure about that? Let me tell you. By when the user sends a message called the update message, start it here. So the user sends the update message. And this update message is a SIP message, right? So the update message is a SIP message. Okay. All right. Someone may tell me, how do we know if the precondition is applied in the call or not? Now, in the SIP invite message that is sent from user 1, appears in it the precondition, if the precondition is applied or not. So if you put that the precondition is applied, user 2 will wait for the update message before it sends the 180 ringing. But what if the answer is no? And how did I know if it's not applied? The invite message sends that the precondition is not applied. And what will happen in this case is that user 2 will not wait for the update message. So again, user 2 will not wait for the update message. Okay. All right. Didn't we say that user 2 has to wait for the update message before it sends the 180 ringing? So this means that user 2 will send here, it will send the 180 ringing. So it will send the 180 ringing. So it will send the 180 ringing without waiting for the update message, without making sure that user 1 reserved for himself a dedicated beer. So again, in case of precondition applied, user number 2 will wait for the update message to make sure that user 1 reserved for himself a dedicated beer. And after the update message is received and it made sure it sends the 180 ringing. And what if precondition is not applied? In that case, user number 2 doesn't wait for the update message as it sends directly the 180 ringing. And what does this, and let me just rephrase that part. What does this actually do? What does this lead to? This might lead to a problem that happened in the A number, as the A number couldn't reserve a dedicated beer and ghost ringing may happen, which means that the B number can answer the call, but the A number still didn't reserve a dedicated beer, so the call will drop. Why do we run to the call precondition? Why not just cancel it? Because we can use it to enhance the call setup time, and this is in regards to the precondition part. So here we reached that the B number sent the 180 ringing. What happens next is that both users answer the call. So what happens next is that both users answer the call. Okay. So the call was answered and the media flow starts. Let's put it a better way. So both users answer the call. Let's put it in a better condition. Call is answered and media flow starts. This is much better. Okay. Let's draw this as well. So the call is answered and media flow starts. So the media packets start getting transferred from user 1 and user 2, but is the pass of traffic or media the same pass of signaling? No, it's not the same. So we explained the call flow, but on a very high level. We said the most important points that happen in the call flow. In the next videos and course, we'll explain in details or the details of the call flow. I just want you to understand it first on a high level because it's very important, as you can get asked in the interview this question. So you have to show the interviewer that you understand this very well, as it will make a big difference with you.